research that is broadly considered important. So this may be a research question within the field that, if answered, will be influential, will be seen as a significant contribution to the field. Perhaps also have implications for other fields, medical practice, or wider society. But it also needs to be relevant. Lots of academic research lacks relevance from time to time. How is answering your research question, though, going to be relevant to other researchers? Is it going to be influential beyond your field? Are the techniques and methods and analyses that you're conducting going to be influential, cause ripple effects within science? But as I keep saying, that wider society, is your research going to contribute towards furthering society, improving public health, improving the environment? These are big motivations for lots of researchers. Novelty is something really interesting for lots of people. We want to be working on research that is new, but think beyond new. Think about being completely original. Somebody, somebody has never thought of answering this research question in this way before. All of this combined hopefully can add to excitement. What is it that excites you as an individual? Have a think for a moment. Just give yourself 10 seconds now to think. What topics interest you? Genuinely interest you? These are the things that you may want to be focused on in future studies. These are the things that are going to motivate you. It all sounds good, but some of you might be thinking, but where do I get started? Well, first we want to choose a topic that you're interested in, and then we're going to deepen our understanding of that topic. How do we deepen our understanding of a certain topic? Well, there's no shortcuts here. I do strongly recommend becoming an expert in that subject. This means lots of reading. You may be reading lots of books and articles, especially review articles. You may be reading preprints. You may be looking at data that's been uploaded onto repositories, making sure that you visit conferences and keep up to date with the news. Why? Why spend all of this time reading? Surely we want to be in the lab conducting experiments instead. Well, for me, the most successful scientists I know are incredibly knowledgeable about the field. They know lots of different professors' names. They know hundreds of papers. They know the ins and outs and the history of the field. All of this is really useful for one unspoken reason. It's not just that through reading all of this stuff, they know what's already been achieved. No. Through reading so much, they are aware of what hasn't been achieved. Through becoming an expert in your field, you know what future studies are needed, which ones are important. And that's where true scientific success can really happen. And that's the type of knowledge and insight that you can get at conferences as well. Just talking to researchers about what gaps they think the field faces. So staying up to date is really important for identifying those knowledge gaps, but also keeping up to date with current techniques. Research moves forward really quickly. You need to have an understanding as to what techniques, methods, and protocols researchers are using today, not 5 years ago. What's today considered the state of the art? What techniques and therefore facilities may you be using yourself in your own research in order to emphasize to a future editor that your work is impactful? But of course, all of this helps you understand the community, who are emerging, interesting, original characters within your research field and beyond. These are the people that you may want to collaborate with. These are the people you may want to work with in perhaps a postdoctoral position in the future. You need to know the field. You need to know the network within your area of research. But also, through reading lots, of course, we'll be identifying relevant journals for our research. And these are the journals that we may want to be publishing in the future. So there's so much to benefit from just making sure that you're reading lots of the literature and becoming an expert in your field. Now, I do recommend using various different databases, indexes for finding articles online. PubMed, Scopus, Clarivate, IEEE, these are all great ways to do keyword searches to find relevant articles, therefore finding the most relevant articles for your research. But also, if we're using databases, we know that we can often trust the articles that we're reading. Lots of journals that want to be included in these databases are actually rejected. 90% of journals that are asked to be included into Web of Science are told no, your journal's not good enough, not high enough quality, you don't have our policies implemented, you don't have a clear peer review process, etc. So if you see an article in a database like Web of Science, you know that you can trust the article has been peer reviewed and is of a suitable level of quality to rely upon for research. So very broad databases like Google Scholar we need to be slightly careful of, because Google Scholar really will include almost any article. It includes any journal into its database. There's no vetting process. So you need to be slightly more careful with relying upon research found through Google Scholar. But as I've said, don't underestimate the importance of attending conferences in learning about research. Do researchers only talk about their published work at conferences? No. Researchers go to conferences and they talk about their unpublished research. And that can help you identify trends in the field. What are people going to be publishing about in years to come? What are emerging fields of research that researchers are currently talking about? Networking is really underrated. Make sure you're not too shy at the conference. Make sure you're talking to other researchers, asking them questions, making them know who you are. These may be future collaborators, future people to work with. Okay? But don't underestimate the importance of reading the media when it comes to science news. Now, lots of us struggle to read all of the literature within our own field, don't we? There's hundreds of papers we should have read. Maybe we haven't read all of them. How often do we find the time to read science outside of our own field? Not very often. Who here reads the science news? Any of you read news in perhaps various different news outlets? Maybe you do. But how many of you read research articles from other fields outside of your own field? Maybe a few of you saying, yes, Harry, I do. But it's not common. Researchers rarely find the time to read all the papers within their field, as I've said. This is unusual for somebody working in chemistry to be reading lots of papers in biology or physics or computational sciences. We don't have the time or the energy to read lots of papers outside of our own field. It's hard. It's hard to learn about research outside of our own field. It's challenging. This is where science news comes in. You can learn about news through the science media a lot more quicker and easier, and it's through learning about research outside of your own field where we can come up with really good interdisciplinary ideas. And you'll know that lots of research funding actually funds interdisciplinary research. So looking at collaborations between physics and chemistry, biology and physics, etc. This is where lots of funding currently lies, but it's also where the impact lies. So what do we do if we have multiple motivations? We're considering the potential impact of work, the likelihood of a success, and also your skills and resources. Scientists are really good at coming up with great ideas, but less good perhaps at being pragmatic. It's a great idea, but in reality, is it going to be successful? Do you have the facilities, the skills, and the resources you need in order to actually achieve answering this research question? Maybe you do. Maybe you need to be more realistic. So consider these things as well when deciding upon your motivations. Are you actually enthusiastic about this idea, or does it just look good on paper? So, there's lots to consider there. I don't expect you to think of your research motivation overnight, but hopefully after today you can give it some more thought. But let's imagine that we do have our research motivation. Now it's time, of course, to identify our research question. What's the question in the field that we want to answer? How do you go about identifying a question? It seems like an odd thing to do. We're often good at finding answers, but how do we find questions? The first thing we need to think of is a research question interesting for the field? Two things to look at here: novelty, relevance. Now, I've already touched upon these a little bit, but let's refresh. What do we actually mean by novelty? We use the word novelty lots in science, don't we? What does it really mean? Well, let's look to the dictionary to find out, shall we? The quality of being new. Okay. Well, lots of things are new. My mobile phone. That's new. This pen. It's fairly new. Lots of things are new, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're impressive. Originality, though, that's something completely different. The quality of being special and interesting are not the same thing as anything else. So forget about novelty and focus more on originality. This can stem from all of the papers that you're going to read, from understanding the important issues that are facing your field. This is what makes humans amazing. To be completely newly creative and original. This is what makes the biggest scientific advances. Nobody had ever thought of doing it that way before. This is how you generate genuinely impactful research. Let's have a think about what journal editors want from a study. Well, they want to be publishing research that is useful for their readers. Your research question that you decide upon will likely affect where you can publish. They want useful and novel research. So which research question is going to be best for you? Well, we've already identified we're going to be really leaning into our reading here to establish gaps within the field. What questions are suggested in review articles or research articles as well? Review articles are really convenient ways to learn about the field. They'll often recommend or suggest future areas of research for the field. Have you read the latest reviews in your field? Have you read the recent articles within your field? Often you'll find in the discussion or conclusion section of these papers, again, identifying potential research questions, future avenues for the research field. So make sure you're scanning the literature for these various things. But to be honest with you, simply talking to your colleagues goes a long way. The average researcher will always have some colleagues, whether you like to hear it or not, who are much smarter than you, who have read much more than you, or perhaps who have different perspectives. Perhaps they've conducted research in different areas, or perhaps they have a slightly different field that they focus on in their research. Regardless of the reason, simply talking to other researchers goes a long way. What ideas do they think are interesting? What limitations do they see in your own research field? Simply talking to others and getting perspectives really goes a long way and can really contribute towards that originality. You have a group of humans around you to talk to offer you their unique perspectives, and therefore that's a unique network of humans. That could be the spark that needs to happen for that crazy, original, radical scientific idea to grow and emerge. Think of it like that. So there's a mixture of things here. There's no one factor. We, as we've said, we want to be thinking about our interest. What interests us? What are we passionate about? What motivates us within the research field? What skills do you have? What techniques are you comfortable using? What protocols are you going to be using within the research? Do you have the facilities available in order to implement those techniques and collect the data that you need in order for you to collect the uh, in order for you to answer the research question? Is answering this research question going to be useful for the field? Is it fundable? Is it going to be publishable in the future? And if so, what journal do you think it may be useful to go into? Is that going to be useful for the readership? But looking wider as well, is the research going to be of interest, of importance to researchers outside of your field? Is it going to influence medical practice? Is it going to more widely contribute to improving society or indeed the environment? Now, these are the ideal research questions right in the middle, the ones that encompass all of these different factors. So, perhaps after some time now, we've identified our research question. Well, with some way towards identifying our study, but we now need to identify our aims. How do we go about preparing our aims? Well, who here has heard of the SMART acronym before? This is a great way to go about designing your aims. We need to make sure our aims are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. What do we mean by specific? We want to make sure our aims are focused. What exactly are we investigating? In other words, what's the variable, condition, or strategy of our research? What are we going to be measuring? We often call this the outcome. Of course, the variable will have an effect on the outcome, and that's often what a study is about. We implement a variable and we measure something. But where are those measurements being taken from? Well, it depends upon the area of research. This could be a sample, it could be a type of fungus, a bacteria, it could be a type of chemical, or it could be a population of people. This is where the measurements are taken from. Every good aim needs all three of these factors: variable, outcome, sample. Make sure that each aim is therefore focused. But of course, each aim needs to be measurable. Think about the methodologies that you're going to be using to obtain and analyze the data. We want to choose appropriate outcomes based on standardized, up-to-date techniques. The key word there, up-to-date. Be using the techniques that editors expect researchers to be using today, not 5 years ago. If the techniques or strategies are not available, well, think about developing new, novel, original ways to measure the outcomes. This makes the work more publishable. If you are able to demonstrate new ways to measure outcomes, this can be really impactful, especially if those new ways are more efficient or affordable. But also we want our aims to be achievable. Do you actually have the necessary expertise to complete the study? It's okay if you don't. In fact, this is an opportunity to learn. We can work with somebody who does have the skills, find collaborators. We can find more expertise that strengthens the robustness of the study. It can also have more perspectives, give greater insight into the study if we have researchers from outside our immediate field of research. But also, we do want our aims to be realistic. Do you actually have the resources and facilities necessary in order to conduct this study? Well, what kind of resources am I referring to here? Well, facilities, equipment, budget, funding, personnel, also representative samples, etc. We'll talk more about this later. But also timely. Can you complete the study in an appropriate amount of time? Some studies are intrinsically time consuming. They sound good on paper, but they will take a long time to conduct. So once we've developed our SMART aims, the next thing I recommend doing, simply talk to your colleagues. Talk to your colleagues about your ideas and use that to help refine your ideas, improve them based upon their insights, their input. Are they convinced that your idea is going to be successful? But of course, how are we going to implement our aims? We need to select the right methodology for our research. We really want to make sure that we design our experiments logically. So you've identified an important problem in the field. So you know where you start. And you know perhaps where you want to end up. Hopefully in a year, 2 or 3 years' time, you can turn around and say, yes, Harry, I provided the solution to that research problem, in which case I would celebrate with you and hopefully we can publish your research in a journal. But of course, something needs to happen in between these two things. We're going to be collecting evidence. So think about what evidence you're going to need to collect to support those conclusions. Every paper is simply a story. We set out to answer this research question. We conducted these experiments. We analyzed the data. These are the conclusions we have. That's all it is. Well, you need to think about what story you're going to want to tell to convince future peer reviewers, future editors, that they can trust your conclusions. And this is certainly what I did during the course of my research studies. I was always thinking, in the future, when I submit this to a journal, when I write my paper for a peer reviewer to evaluate, what story do I want to tell? So we need to plan what our experiments are going to be. We did this experiment, and then based upon those results, we moved on to explore this. But based upon those results, we moved on to this. In other words, we need a logical flow of steps from one experiment to the other to convincingly convey to a future peer reviewer or editor that we did things logically, that our study made sense. Okay, this really can help persuade a journal editor and peer reviewer. So we need to think about what methods exactly we're going to be using to obtain that evidence. How do you decide upon which methods you're going to be using exactly? Well, of course, through previous research. And again, there's no shortcuts here. I do really recommend exploring the literature, doing lots of reading, having a good understanding of what up-to-date research looks like in your field. So an understanding of kind of up-to-date techniques, methods, but even more importantly, protocols, exact protocols that you may be using in your research directly. And this comes into trust, doesn't it? We want to be using protocols that we can trust, that we know are likely to work. And as you know, not all scientific experiments do actually work, sadly. We're in the midst of what's called a reproducibility crisis. Lots of studies, especially in the life sciences, aren't able to be replicated. So having an understanding of what research you might be able to trust and which research perhaps we need to be more skeptical of goes a really long way. So the peer-reviewed literature is often going to be a lot more reliable than preprints, for example. Using all of this really to make a convincing argument in the future to get published. Think about what evidence is going to be necessary. Thinking about what experiments have been done already to avoid redundancy as well. We want to have that novelty and originality, and we don't want our work to be too derivative either. So can you modify previous protocols to be more appropriate for your study and therefore be more original or more novel at least? So some questions to ask when you're considering methods. Does this method allow me to perform the necessary manipulations? Can this method measure the variables of interest at sufficient resolution? Do I have the time, skills, resources, and materials necessary for this method? Is this method technically challenging? One I can do more simply and quickly? So again, prioritize these methods, the ones that are suitable for your research, the ones that are feasible, but you actually have the resources to conduct, but also simplicity goes a long way. If we're using simple methods over technically challenging methods, we're less likely to fail. Data can be perhaps more reliable as well, and the experiments are also more repeatable. Think about who's going to be conducting these methods. Are you going to be conducting these methods? Or will it be more junior, less experienced researchers? We also need to assess resources. Will you have access to the necessary facilities, equipment? We do want to make sure that we do have up-to-date, sufficient equipment. If we don't have up-to-date equipment that's expected from journal editors, that can lead to concerns of accuracy or reliability of your findings. But also, we want to be thinking about how we're going to access consumables. Do we have the funds relevant for that? How are we going to access samples, especially if this is a medical clinical study? How are we going to access population? But also, as I've said before, do we have the relevant expertise in order to conduct this study effectively? And consider funding always. How are you going to fund this study? If you don't have access to all of these resources, as we said before, collaboration goes a long way, especially with collaborators outside of your field. This is where the most impactful research really grows, in between fields. What do you think are some of the benefits of collaborations? Well, it's been shown a number of times that collaborations really can lead to more impactful research. Through collaborations, we'll have increased resources, but also increased expertise. It's amazing to be working with somebody who's an expert in another field because they provide their unique insights, their unique ideas and contributions to the study. But also we can learn lots from them. Perhaps we can become over time an expert in their field and our own field. But also it allows more diversity. Perhaps we can now have access to diverse samples and populations for turning regional studies into more collaborations that are international. But what do we think about generative AI? How can we use generative AI to help assist all of these steps that we've been talking about today? Well, I do recommend using generative AI to help establish impactful research. Using tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, DeepSeek, or more specialized tools like Consensus really goes a long way. So I do recommend after today, if you haven't used a tool like ChatGPT, start exploring. Ask it about research questions. Ask it your research question. Ask it if there's a way to refine or elaborate or expand upon your research idea. Now, the only thing we need to be careful of is validating the outputs. These tools are known to hallucinate. They can make up information that's not accurate, but it's still a really valuable tool for brainstorming. Some of us are somewhat shy. We don't talk openly, perhaps, about the things we don't understand, or perhaps about our radical new ideas for advancing the field. But now, for the first time in history, scientists have an anonymous expert that we can talk to about all of our ideas and help refine our ideas. So yes, if you haven't used a tool like ChatGPT yet, I do recommend doing so after today. Well, we finished a few minutes earlier than I had planned, but that does mean we have plenty of time for any questions. So you have any questions at all, now's your chance to put these into the question box. And then I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. So please put your questions into that chat box.
Uh, thank you very much, Harry, for a very interesting talk and very informative. And yes, we will be waiting for our attendees to send some questions. But in the meantime, I think we should go back to the Q&A slide. Sophia, yes, thank you. Yep, and yeah, just give me a second. I will request remote control. Yes. So for all the attendees who are asking about the CME credits, as usual, we get all the credits at the end of the series of webinars, which we have 6 of them. So please make sure that you attend the webinars to get the CME credit at the end. This is regarding the CME's point. So the first, you start with discussing the importance of motivation when it comes to researchers, and I totally agree with that. However, my question is about how to sustain this motivation. So it is very important to start it, but nowadays, and I think we have a global kind of a common challenges when it comes to conducting research with the funding, with the resources and everything. So yeah, it's great to be very motivated to start the whole process, but how to keep or to sustain this motivation throughout the journey of research, Harry?
Yeah, it's a really good question. How do you maintain motivation throughout a study? And this extends beyond science, right? I think it becomes more personal. It becomes about our attitude towards life, which might sound quite deep, but I can only speak from my own personal perspective. Life isn't supposed to be easy. Nobody said life was easy. Nobody said science was easy. Science is one of the most challenging endeavors, or research in general is an incredibly challenging endeavor. And the thing I see again and again in young researchers as they move from perhaps undergraduate or master's to PhD is they begin to realize science often doesn't work. You're taught in textbooks that this is how science works, X goes to Y, and this is the mechanism. But the reality of science is far more gritty and complex. And the most successful scientists are the ones who are able to bounce back. So I think going in with an attitude that this is hard, that things are going to fail again and again, and that this isn't supposed to be easy really goes a long way. But also, I recommend having things outside of work. Research, science, that should only be one part of your life. You should have a life outside of work that acts to motivate you. You need things to look forward to outside of work. You need to make sure that you're using your body, that you're eating well, that you're communicating and keeping in touch with positive people in your life. So I think the most successful scientists as well have a good kind of set up outside of work that works for them. There's no wrong or right answer. If you want to spend your entire weekend reading books in the library, that's what works for you. So yeah, we really want to have those things outside of work as well that make it all a bit more manageable. But yeah, I do think having an attitude of life's not easy. Life's supposed to be hard. Goes a long way. And the
Mm.
thing to take home really is that we learn from our mistakes. So when things aren't going well in a study, we use that as an opportunity for growth. And that's kind of a way to look at it.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. And now we start having a lot of questions. I think many attendees they thank you for a very nice talk. They it seems they enjoyed it. Maybe I will go directly because we were talking about challenges and in research. I will go to a question. It seems to be very kind of specific, but we want really to know your thoughts about it. Person asking or researcher asking about how you can afford fees for publication in a high impact journal if you don't have a funding. Of course, this is depends on which institute we're talking about, which country, and all of that. But in general, do you have any kind of recommendation for people who do not have funding and they want to publish in high impact journals who usually ask for a high publication fees?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you do want to publish and you don't have funding, you may be able to ask the institution for support.
Mhm,
Institutions receive block grants from funders to help support their researchers in publishing in journals that have a fee. So the institution may be able to support you even if you don't have your own funding yourself. So
mhm,
do reach out to see if that support is there. But also lots of publishers, if you're wanting to publish, but you don't have the funds, just let them know. Let the publisher know that you don't have the funds and they may be able to support you. Now, at Springer Nature, we offer discounts on charges for authors who don't have the funds or can't afford the entire charge. But I do know that some open access publishers, such as Frontiers, they will offer free publication for authors who aren't able to afford the fee. So it's worthwhile exploring what support is out there from the institution, but also from publishers. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Harry. Another question. This is related to designing a different kind of type of research question. So a person was asking about, like if you want to ask a question related to how to drive a social change or kind of different social behaviors, not necessarily generating an evidence. So you have to take this into account as well when you're designing your question or you're designing your research. So it's not about bringing a new evidence to the scientific community, but it's about driving some sort of behavior or social kind of behaviors.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the importance of science communication. Um,
Mm,
we conduct studies and then we publish in journals, but who actually reads those journals? It's a very small
mm,
percentage of the population. Most of the world is not science. Most of the world aren't scientists. And that's where
mm,
science communication comes in. So after you've finished a study or during the course of the study, think about ways to communicate your ideas with the public. And scientists don't do this enough. Engaging in perhaps social media posts, considering reaching out to journalists who might write about your research, considering talking about your research on YouTube, things that researchers rarely do. But we've got lots of platforms nowadays where scientists can speak up and talk about their research. And all of that will help influence behavior. If the public are aware of emerging important ways to behave to improve their health or to improve the environment, then science can go a long way. But yeah, this is one of the issues that scientists and society faces is that scientists and the general population don't talk as much as they should do. But
mm.
it's something really important. But yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah, another question. The person or the researcher is asking about tips to reach the paper to Scopus or to highly impactful journals. I think you talked about how the editors look at the novelty, but there is any quick kind of tips for anybody who would like to publish a paper in impactful journal. There is any quick tips that you can give?
Yeah, I mean, there's no secret formula for publishing in a high impact journal, but I think we need to be looking at novelty and originality. So this
Mhm,
needs to be an advance that is not just new, but strikingly new. This is perhaps
Mm.
something that scientists wanted to achieve for a long time. This is the first time somebody's actually been able to do it. But it's not just novelty. Like I said, novelty doesn't necessarily mean anything. Like this pen is new, doesn't mean it's necessarily impressive. But we need to look about the influence that the work's going to have. So perhaps you've designed a technique that thousands of researchers from now on are going to be using because it's such a powerful, useful, efficient, generalizable technique. So things like that go a long way. In terms of kind of like clinical studies, generalizability goes a long way. So we want to be
Mm.
studying populations that are broad representations of the global population so that we know that the intervention isn't just going to work amongst people from India. The intervention is likely to work throughout the whole world. So
Mm.
generalizability goes a long way, as does transferability. So you've designed this technique in biology, but perhaps physicists, chemists can also use this technique. So just think about the broadness of the impact and the novelty, really. I think those are two key things. But with that, also
Yeah.
you need really strong data to support your claims.
Yeah, and Harry, it's what I like most about when you talked about you don't have to have all the knowledge in all the discipline, but when you want to kind of have successful collaboration that would boost your research and your research questions. However, like there is a question about, like how we can achieve successful collaboration. So, many times we discuss things with people, we have potential collaboration, but not necessarily that means it will be achievable and successful collaboration at the end. So, there is any recipe for successful collaboration between researchers?
Well, we want to be somebody who is able to work with other people well.
Mm,
And lots of scientists don't actually have these skills.
mhm,
Um, we want to be somebody who is able to communicate ideas effectively, be reliable, trustworthy, open to other ideas. But finding collaborations doesn't happen overnight. We need to be talking to people lots. So when we go to
mm,
conferences, we want to be that person who is going around talking to lots of people, asking questions at talks, asking questions at poster presentations. These are the people who build up collaborations over time. Um, I wasn't that person when I was researching. I was very quiet. I didn't talk to lots of researchers. But if I had, then I could have been a lot more successful. I could have perhaps established some really exciting collaborations, but I never pushed myself to kind of be very open and communicable. But if you're able to kind of make that leap, it can really go a long way.
yeah, and also I believe that we don't have enough collaboration platforms to kind of facilitate that. I think we can do more, I think, by designing platforms to facilitate collaboration. I do have here a question. I think it is very specific. Somebody, I think they establishing a research question. Do you recommend new herbal medicine study for known common diseases or rare diseases?
Well, that can certainly can be useful. And it's a very specific question.
Mm,
Without knowing the details, I would say it's very important for you to identify the active component of the herbal medicine. So you want to be
mm,
conducting a chemical analysis of the sample, perhaps a chromatography of some sort. You want to be identifying what the active component is, and then based upon that, scanning the literature to explore if anybody's explored this before. And then perhaps you want to be looking at isolating the active component as well. Um, but yeah, potentially, I mean, it really depends, but potentially there's always something potentially useful in ancient herbal medicines. And then if you can identify the active components, what you'd be interested in doing as well is creating derivatives. So synthesizing derivatives of the active component to perhaps find an enhanced active analog. So that's structure SAR studies, structure
Mm.
and SAR structure and I can't remember what R stands for because this is an area of research I haven't been in for 10 years now. But yeah, find the active component and then consider making derivatives. That would be my recommendation. But without seeing the exact research, I'm kind of guessing. But it sounds like an interesting area of research.
Yes, so I think the last point will be closing the session very soon. It's about AI, the philosophy of using AI in research. Like we can, as you mentioned, there's several tools to, like ask about research questions, about our ideas to, validate that. But how we can differentiate between our original kind of source and AI, or it's okay to have something from AI. Does it have to be, us all the time?
Yeah, it's perfectly okay to write using generative AI. Most
Mm-hmm.
publishers are now very open to authors using generative AI. Um,
Mm-hmm.
why not? Lots of researchers don't have English as a native language. So it's hard for researchers who are perhaps haven't grown up with the English language or are not super confident. It's a great tool to help researchers. But it's also really useful to refine your ideas, improve your grammar, improve the readability of your writing. So yes, do use these tools, do use them to write, but do make sure that you validate the outputs. It can make up information. So you want to, of course, you want to be validating all of the information that it gives you, and providing citations as well. You want to be making sure you cite all of the information, um, but also we do want to disclose usage of it. So
Mm,
if you're submitting a paper to almost any mainstream journal, you'll be asked to disclose whether you use generative AI or not.
mm, mm,
Um, and of course, we want to be open about that. But no, most publishers are very open and
mhm.
about the use of generative AI.
Yeah, I think we are about to close the session. Thank you very much, Dr. Harry, for investing your time with us today. We really enjoyed the discussion, and as I discussed with you before, the third phase of Great Webinars, it will be about training, hands-on training for researchers, and definitely we will be having you there again. Thank you very much for being here, and wishing you a great day.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So as we said, our next webinar, we have a list of webinars. Sorry, the slides went quickly. But as I mentioned before, this group or series of webinars will be about the focus topics. So if you are interested in clinical trials, we will do have Prof. Matt Strauss next webinar, our next webinar on the 9th of April. And it will be about the discovery and delivery, everything to do about clinical trials. So if you are you have a special interest in clinical trials, this is where you should join us. And I'm like encouraging all of you, all the C.R.E.A.T.E community, to join us in all the webinars. And after that, also we will be talking about cohort studies on the 30th of April, and cross-sectional studies, like is it matters or not, the strengths and impact of it. And that will be on Thursday, 14th of May. After that, also we'll talk about the strategies, successful strategies for research recruitment on the 4th of June. And at the end, we will be talking about our local guidelines in the DHA on the 25th of June. Please make sure that you are with us and tuned for our announcement. We want to make the second series of webinars, create webinars, a success as well. And I would like to thank all of you for being here today. Wishing you a great evening, and we'll see you in our next webinars. Take care and see you next time. Bye bye.